Funding for A Promise Called Iowa was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation. Generations of families and friends who feel passionate about Iowa Public Television programming.
A generation ago, these Iowans of European descent and Iowans from Southeast Asia seemed about as different as could be.
Glad to see you.
Yet today, they share a powerful bond that has transcended culture, tradition, language, religion, and race. And it all began with a war. It was called the Vietnam War. In reality, it was waged in Laos and Cambodia as well, three countries that had once been labeled French Indochina. When that war was over and the United States had gone home, over a period of more than 20 years, more than 3 million Vietnamese, Lao, and Cambodians left their homes. Many forced out, starved out, persecuted, killed. They were refugees, and some of them would find friends in Iowa. This is the story of how that happened.
I didn't think we could just sit here idly and say, let those people die. We wouldn't want the rest of the world to say that about us if we were in the same situation.
Do unto others.
Do unto others, as you'd have them do unto you.
On January 16, 1975, Robert D. Ray was sworn in as governor of Iowa for the fourth time. A popular politician, he had won the previous fall's election with 58% of the vote. 4 months later, on the other side of the world, a UPI photographer caught this image during the fall of Saigon, as about 130,000 South Vietnamese scrambled to get out of the country. Cambodia had already fallen to communists. Laos would later in the year. At that time, refugees were admitted to the United States on an ad hoc basis, either by special legislation or a special act by the Attorney General called parole. Also at that time, refugees were resettled in the United States by private nonprofit groups. They were called voluntary agencies. But in July 1975, President Ford wrote every governor, urging state governments to do all they could to help resettle the Southeast Asians, offering $500 for each refugee a state helped. The letter said, many individuals and voluntary agencies are participating in the resettlement program, but we should not expect that they alone will accomplish this great humanitarian task as quickly as we would all wish. Iowa's governor chose to help.
I thought it was impossible for us to sit here in a land of plenty, to be blessed with so much, and let those people over there who fought on our side die. I didn't think that was justifiable. And as I said, I think a person could justify doing nothing. He could argue that his constituents didn't want any more people. They had too much responsibility for people on welfare right then. They can make all kinds of arguments to justify their position. I didn't think I was justified in doing that.
Still, there were risks, and not just for the refugees. In 1975, Michael Gartner was editor of the Des Moines Register.
People have their own lives, and to bring in not one person or two people, but a family or several families, and with language problems, culture problems, food problems, religion issues, that is never easy.
Former Ambassador Ken Quinn spent a career in the Foreign Service. While he would work closely with Governor Ray a few years later, he was in Washington when South Vietnam fell.
Can you take people who are racially different, so different, and insert them into the middle of essentially a Caucasian society and make it work? That was a big risk. I think that was a big challenge. It was not at all certain. And it was a thing where it was very important what the political leadership did and said as to whether it would work or not.
That political leadership came from Bob Ray, says David Yepsen, who covered the State House for more than 20 years for the Des Moines Register.
He was midway in his tenure as governor, so he had established himself. He had some roots, he had some credibility, he had some capital. He was popular. Another governor in a more tenuous situation, in a more volatile political state, might not have been willing to take the risk. Many of them didn't. But Ray did, and I think it was, I don't think it was a cynical political calculation at all on his part. He was just touched by what he saw and felt a need to try to do something.
We said we'll take our fair share, and now we have to plan on how we're going to do that and what we're going to do when these people arrive. And so that was kind of the beginning of it all.
Thousands of refugees were already temporarily housed at 4 military bases in the United States when Ray formed the Governor's Task Force for Indochinese Resettlement. It was placed in the state's Employment Services Division and headed by Colleen Shearer. The idea was that the refugees would go to work rather than go on welfare.
I did think it would be more acceptable, but that wasn't what prompted me to do that. These people, if I understood correctly, were good working people. They were good moral people. They were good family people, and I didn't want to spoil that. And I think if you get on welfare, it's very easy to have that change your lifestyle, and I didn't want that to happen.
That same summer, the governor's office received a couple of pleas about the plight of a distinct ethnic group, the Tai Dam. One petition came from American Art Crisfield. Still living in Southeast Asia today, he had worked in Laos, where he got to know the Tai Dam, formerly of Vietnam. Crisfield wrote to many governors seeking refuge for them. The Tai Dam were looking for a permanent home, and they wanted to settle as a group.
So I responded thinking maybe we could do that. And then there was a glitch. There was a problem. And that was the State Department had a policy that refugees could not be relocated in a group in any one community. And there was logic to that because, you know, you can't just dump a lot of people in a community. So I understood that, but I thought there was a good reason for the exception. And so I worked with the State Department and the White House, and I remember making the trip to talk to Henry Kissinger and then to Jerry Ford. And in the final analysis, they agreed and they made the exception. And so we were able to invite the Tai Dam to come to Iowa.
And he was the only one who responded and said, we will take you as a group. And a phenomenal thing to do, you know? I mean, just to open your arms.
The final decision to resettle the Tai Dam was taken later that summer. In October, task force members went to meet them at Camp Pendleton and Fort Chaffee. In the meantime, sponsors were being solicited in Iowa. But not everyone appreciated what was being done.
One woman called. She'd called in the daytime, and I answered the telephone call at night and told her who I was. And I said, I understand you have a problem with what we're doing. And she said, yes. She said, how can you possibly bring those foreigners over here and give them our good jobs? And I said, well, knowing what this call was about, I had staff go through the Des Moines Register and count the number of ads for employment. And I said, I don't know how many, there were 400 or some. I said, I'll make you a deal. You go out and get one of those jobs, before any of these people show up in Iowa. Big pause. She said, I get the point.
The first Tie Dam arrived in late October 1975. Iowa and Iowans were in the refugee business. The oldest part of this farmhouse near Rose Hill, Iowa, was built about 150 years ago. And for all those years, the same Iowa family lived and worked on this land, a more than century farm. By late 1975, the house, still intact at that time, was standing empty.
My mother had died, and there's somebody that needed a place to live.
The people who needed a place to live were the Tie Dam, and Ruth and Raymond Walker had a house available. Only a few years before, the Walker's son Leland had served in South Vietnam, arriving in country in 1968, just a few months after the Tet Offensive. Working in a propaganda unit in the Ben Hoa area, he took thousands of personal photos, pictures of a skirmish he could see from his office. Pictures at a nearby orphanage to which his parents sent clothes and other items. And pictures of the Vietnamese he got to know.
And those pictures, I think, showed my parents that the Vietnamese were real people, just like us. They tried to provide homes, education, everything, food for their families, just like us. So my folks could identify with the refugees before they even met them because they'd seen they were real people.
About 7 years after their son's service, Ruth and Raymond Walker signed on to be sponsors.
Our governor at that time was begging people to sponsor some. There was so many that needed a place to go and everything, and so we liked our governor and ended up doing that.
Married in 1936, by 1975, the Walkers had a 500-acre farm with row crop, pasture, and timberland. They farrowed to finish about 1,000 pigs a year and sold feeder calves. And they had raised 3 children, one with severe disabilities who still lived at home. They had full lives.
They expressed some apprehension and wondered what they were getting themselves into, but yet were willing to take that risk, that chance.
That chance began a journey that hasn't ended, though Raymond died in 2000 and Ruth has had serious health problems. While their son Leland and his wife Joan were on the farm, they also sponsored a family. We asked Leland if they could invite a few of the former refugees to meet with us. We met more than a few. On a gray, rainy September Sunday afternoon, more than 30 Southeast Asians gathered at Ruth's house. Their presence alone bore witness to how Raymond and Ruth Walker had changed their lives, helping them make a new home in Iowa. The seeds of this gathering were planted in 1975 when the Quang family arrived on the first plane with other Tie Dam refugees.
We were expecting a family with a couple of parents and a couple of children for the 2-bedroom house, and instead got 2 sets of wives and husbands and 5 other boys and 2 other girls. So that was a big surprise. The night before they said, bring at least 2 cars.
Yeah, when they first the house, they say they really like that because they actually saw the house that we're going to live on, and she feel like, wow, I actually have a place to stay with all my family.
During the first weeks, when Ruth came by, she would go in a little house behind the farmhouse before she brought them some food. She told the family they needed to go to the little house too, but they didn't understand why. There was a language problem at first.
And then one day, Mom keeps telling, she always tell me to go there so we could take a peek. We saw a freezer, white, light, the light down one, not upright one. We thought it's her mother's coffin. Oh, wow. It looks just like coffin. You have to, that's how we have a coffin is in our country, it's that. And then she always, there's the first thing she always do is that. And Mom would say, you know what? I would think that's her mother's right there, and that's why she always go see her mother until quite a few months back. See, every time she go check, everything was still there until she take it out for us. We never go get them because we never have enough to go open it up. Until she come and get Mom and say, Mom, food. She open them up, and we say, oh, wow.
Many Southeast Asians from all around the state bought market hogs from the Walkers for years, coming to the farm and butchering them themselves. It was what they were used to doing in their home country. Until a few years ago, some of the local families still gardened behind the old two-bedroom farmhouse, including growing extremely hot peppers and a lot of garlic. They shared the produce with the family. And the Southeast Asians still enjoy the river that runs through the Walkers' farm.
In Southeast Asia, these people tend to eat more fish than beef or pork or chicken like they do here. So having access to a river made them feel like they were at home, and they certainly took advantage of it.
The gate at the road leading to the river is locked, so the levees aren't damaged by strangers and livestock doesn't get loose. The electric company and some locals have keys, and so too do the Southeast Asians. In addition to the families that Raymond and Ruth sponsored officially, there were many others they unofficially helped. In 1980, the Walkers Church sponsored a Cambodian family.
Was that Raymond?
Yeah, that's Raymond.
Yeah.
You don't know your husband is.
Leland hired the father to work on the farm, and they lived in the little house for 8 months. Raymond and Ruth, along with some other church members, once again became grandparents, as they were called.
They're a very special family to our family, and that's what it is. He's, especially Raymond, I remember him the most, even when we moved back to Oskaloosa, whenever he had to go to Oskaloosa to get anything, he made sure he stopped by to see us. Always remembered, Valentine's Day to bring chocolate, and as little kids, we loved seeing him because it meant we also got $5 each when we were just little, So, and during the holidays, whether they came on time or not, but they're always there for all the special times in our family and our lives. So, well, this is important for us.
I so mad at him a little bit because my daughter not married that time, and he's sick. I said, Grandpa, you don't go anywhere until I got my daughter married first before you go, okay? And he said, yeah. He said like that, and after that he passed away before that, I kind of a little upset,
Amen.
Amen.
Leave you first.
First, I get for my mother.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Are you glad that you sponsored the refugees?
Oh, yes.
Why did you like it? What did it do to change your life?
We were proud. We were proud of what we'd done, and they just they come so close to us and everything, just like they were family.
Family. That was the word we heard from everyone. We heard many stories, too many to recount them all. As in any family, there were misunderstandings as they learned from and about each other. And as in any family, there was a lot of give and take, giving when they could, taking when they needed.
Okay, I'll do another one.
To talk about things that we did for them, a tornado hit the farm in '86 and destroyed several buildings, fences, blew trees down, and there were dozens of the refugees that came out and helped throw garbage onto the wagons so that we could get it out of the field so we could do the farming. So they would do whatever we would ask them to do if we needed their help, just as we were willing to help them when they needed help. There was a lot of work. There were some farm things that didn't get done by my folks or later by me because of this, but it certainly wasn't something that we regretted.
Never, never.
Grandpa Walker could never be placed. He was so close to me. Yeah, yeah.
So close to all of us, too.
My husband died, and there was more tie doms there at that funeral than you could imagine. Right down the road a little ways is the cemetery, and boy, here come the tie doms. One tie dom that was so talented sang over at the cemetery.
Nat and Muon, the ministers, sang "Nearer, My God to Thee" in Vietnamese or in Tai Dam language.
By a gravel road, in a cemetery named for a town that no longer exists, an Iowa farmer was laid to rest in 2000, honored by family and friends, many from the other side of the world. Now, there are probably people who don't understand that the Walkers were simply doing what needed to be done. Someone needed help, so they shared an empty house with a family who needed a home. They took a chance, and that made all the difference. On January 20th, 1977, a new administration took over in Washington, President Jimmy Carter and Vice President Walter Mondale. And Vietnam was still in the news. The day after his inauguration, Carter pardoned most young Americans who had avoided the draft. As to refugees, in Iowa, with the state's help, almost 1,400 Tai Dam had started new lives by then.
You want to take a cart?
The Iowa office that resettled refugees went on shorter hours that June, looking forward to the time it would close. There were still thousands in refugee camps in Southeast Asia, and refugees still trickled into the U.S. But the big influx was over, and refugees weren't the only legacy of the war.
And the big issue was the POW MIA, because President Carter had made very strong commitments in the campaign about the priority he would give to that issue. And so at the very beginning of his administration, one of the first things he did was to send a delegation to Hanoi to begin the process.
The refugee story wasn't over, though. As conditions worsened in Southeast Asia, people continued migrating. Nearby countries of first asylum didn't know what to do with the growing exodus.
And basically, we and the French and the Australians and the Canadians and everybody, other Europeans who had been taking people, said, well, sorry, you know, we've kind of done that. We don't have any more legal authority. We don't have any more parole authority. We don't have any political decision in our country to do this. We've kind of done it. And so this started building up.
CBS reports with Ed Bradley. The Boat People.
Then came Tuesday night, January 16th, 1979.
I recall Ed Bradley was going to do a program. And I went to a Drake basketball game that night, and I asked my wife to be sure and tape that program. And when I came home, I learned what was happening, and it was just tragic what was happening.
Only a few fishermen helped the boat people ashore. We joined in.
These frail little boats with people trying to save their lives and get away were breaking apart, and people were dying, and you could see them right there on the screen. And once again, I thought, we've got to do something to help that situation because the contract was running out with the government to resettle refugees. And so I called staff members, and we went down to the office late at night and drafted a letter to the new president, Jimmy Carter, and told him that we thought that they should reopen the refugee program, and we were willing to help.
Through a State Department special exchange program, Ken Quinn was one of Ray's staff who joined him at the State House that night.
Would have been an easy thing for somebody in politics to turn away from, because it wasn't like in 1975 and 76 where the federal government was already saying, we're taking all these people, we're bringing them here, and you're going to do your part. Each state's going to do its part. No, there was none of that.
But there soon would be some of that and more.
We decided we had to do something about, in a big way, about these refugees. Now, just when that happened, I don't know, but I got a call from the State Department, Dick Holbrooke, who was Assistant Secretary for Asia, and he said the United States has got to lead an international effort to find a humanitarian answer here. And he asked me to get involved, and I did. And I quickly learned about Bob Ray and others in these states that were trying to do something to provide a humanitarian home and a place for these refugees.
The White House knew of our interests and our leadership, and we were pressing them to help internationally because the whole world needed to be a part of this, not just Iowa or just the United States.
If you're going to talk to other countries about doing something like this, you better have something you've done that's specific. Otherwise, they won't tell you, but they think you're a hypocrite. Mm-hmm. So you got to deal with it first yourself to lead. We encouraged the UN to hold this refugees conference in Geneva, and before we went there, we developed our own program to take a certain number of refugees, which was the largest ever in American history, and we took the historic step of ordering the 6th Fleet to go in and pick these people up and save them. Governor Ray had a name for leadership in this field. I had talked to him several times during the struggle, and when I put my delegation together to go to Geneva, I wanted people who really knew the issue, and I wanted a bipartisan delegation.
Several different countries' representatives spoke, and they all talked about the tragic circumstance of the boat people. None offered any solution. And finally, when Vice President Walter Mondale spoke, Very eloquently, he talked about what the United States of America was willing to do.
The day began in an atmosphere of expectation as Vice President Walter Mondale took the floor.
Before offering solutions, the Vice President compared this international conference to another one held 41 years before. In 1938, the survival of the Jews of Germany and Austria was threatened by the Nazis. Mondale said 32 nations of asylum, including the United States, failed the test of civilization, refusing to accept Jews who had tried to leave the Third Reich. The United States didn't want the world to fail again.
Today, the President of the United States has asked me to advise you.
My recollection is that we offered to take 168,000 refugees in our country to solve the problem. And it was a thrilling moment as everybody was on his or her feet. They were standing there cheering, and the boat people were saved. Other countries then stepped up and offered to take so many, and so it was done. And right then, anybody could be very proud of this country.
I thought we looked like a country that believed in something, had a humanitarian impulse, and were willing to put our actions to our words, resources, and do things like when I announced at Geneva that the President had just ordered the Sixth Fleet, the place exploded. The idea that the American would use their Navy for that sort of thing, I think it just hit people all over the world as saying, this is something, and they were thrilled about it. Those people that were saved, they looked up at these young Americans, saw the American flag, they were lifted out of the boat, taken up there and given a chance for a new life and a better, they'll never forget that. In this time in the world, when we seem to be making sometimes more enemies than friends, it's good to remember that there's better ways of doing this thing.
This was an issue of how do we save lives? And our country should have been and was a leader in saving lives. And we had a pretty good reputation at that moment. I wish it still was as good.
The end result of the Geneva Conference was more openings worldwide for the Southeast Asian refugees, Vietnamese and Lao and Cambodians. More money went to refugee relief efforts. The Philippines and Indonesia volunteered processing centers.
Mr. and Mrs. Robert Miller, are you here? Have you met your family?
Some boats would still embark on dangerous waters, but asylum countries didn't try to prevent refugees landing.
It's one of the most successful international efforts in world history. I think something over 1 million people, I don't have the exact numbers, were handled humanely. Lives were saved. These people in St. Paul now, one of them's a state senator. We got 3 or 4 doctors over there. We've got lawyers, successful businessmen. The old American story. They're all just they're elected to the school board. It's a great story.
In September 1979, not all Iowans saw the promise. A Des Moines Register, Iowa poll showed 51% of Iowans were against resettling more refugees.
49% said, yes, we are doing the right thing. And I think the others, if we had had an opportunity to sit and talk as you and I are talking today, I think they would also have supported it. Maybe not all of them, of course. And like I said earlier, there were reasons why people would say, don't let other people in our borders. But that was not in question as far as I was concerned.
And Southeast Asian refugees kept coming to Iowa.
Ramirez Fazez Bosnia. Vien Vu Tuong Nguyen, Vietnam.
It was the roll call of soon-to-be new citizens at the United States District Court in downtown Des Moines. 83 people from 29 countries became new Americans. They took an oath. They recited the Pledge of Allegiance.
Of the United States of America.
And they were welcomed by various Iowans, including one of their own, a Vietnamese refugee who had gone through the same process to become a citizen.
I encourage you, I urge you to exercise this new freedoms and new liberties.
Ted Tran takes American freedoms very seriously. He lives them every day as a district representative for Congressman Leonard Boswell. Ted's journey to this time and place began in early April 1981. He was 9 years old. Ted's father put him and an older brother and sister on a boat. His parents and 4 younger brothers stayed in Vietnam. Ted and his 2 older siblings spent 6 days and 6 nights at sea.
I just throw up day after day. We have no water, no food. I get maybe a sip of water a day for 6 days. And when we're on the boat, it was like the sun just beating on us. The boat was very small, fishing boat. We had close to 90 people. We were cramming like sardine in a can.
Next came about 6 months in refugee camps in Malaysia.
I grew up really fast. That forced me to be mature really at really early age. I just close it.
Finally, Ted and his brother and sister arrived in Iowa October 1st, 1981. He became a citizen 10 years later.
It's a great feeling. You know you have all this freedom. Good afternoon, Congressman Boswell. This is Ted.
People like Ted and myself, the same things make us happy. Same thing makes us cry, makes us feel bad. We care for family. We care for country. We care for our neighbors and so on. I see that in Ted, so I'm very fond of Ted.
Ted respects and admires his boss's 20-year military service to the country, including his 2 tours as a decorated Vietnam vet, helping the South Vietnamese. In one of those unique twists of fate, Boswell first landed in South Vietnam in the same town where Ted Tran would spend his first 9 years, Vung Tau.
I love working for him because he understands who I am, where I come from.
Ted's roots mean a lot to him, which is why he's trying to create a young Asian American professionals organization. Among other things, he wants it to help the next generation of Asian Iowans enter the professional world. That's what this lunch is about. Ted knows the difference help can make. He and his siblings were minors without parents when they first arrived and needed foster parents, not sponsors. The Iowa State Resettlement Agency didn't provide direct services, so a private voluntary agency, Lutheran Social Services, placed them. That's where Vicki and Lynn Farmer ended up when they decided to expand their family.
When our boys were small, I really, really wanted a girl. And I thought that we would end up having a football team if we kept having children. And I knew there were a lot of kids who needed homes.
With that, the Farmers started their own journey. Because they already had 2 sons and a small house, they were advised to continue with boys when they eventually foster parented 4 Vietnamese children. One of them would be Ted Tran, a teenager by then, still going by his Vietnamese name, Teen. Before he connected with the Farmers, Ted had lived with 5 foster families, permanent and temporary.
Teen was our 3rd foster son. But Teen is I think the foster son who was with us the longest, who became a son. that grew up with our boys, and we became very close to him and still are. I consider Tina's son. We really love him.
It was between Thanksgiving and Christmas when we visited the farmers at their home just outside of Cedar Rapids and asked Ted to join us.
We would cut one out in the backyard and haul it up here.
Yeah, I think all the trees back there.
Today, the farmers don't get to see Ted as often as they would like, but they understand. Ted's wife, Teresa, is doing her medical residency in Texas. That means lots of traveling.
I haven't seen this one yet.
Now that's my tall
And the farmers, his stepbrothers and their families, aren't the only relatives Ted has in Cedar Rapids.
Kids. This is my idea of cooking on a Saturday.
His older Vietnamese brother and sister and their families are also in town. So there are a lot of demands on his loyalties and his time. But there is no doubt that Ted Tran is a permanent part of this family. The photos tell the story, with memories of family trips and family celebrations, school pictures and activities. And the farmers didn't just invite Ted into their world. As any parent would, they tried to share in his world. For example, they bought rice in 25-pound bags and broadened their own diet.
We tried to treat him as much like a son as we could.
I mean, I was always determined that even though he wasn't my birth son, that he would know we loved him, that you know, we did the leather jacket and the photos and the class ring and just really wanted him to fit in with.
And there were jobs I gave him around here to do. Mm-hmm. And he didn't always like them, but...
Just like family. And it worked. Ted Tran found a place he belonged. Over the takeout pizza, we asked Ted and the farmers how they thought they had altered each other's lives.
I would say you've altered our life in teaching us that it doesn't really matter where you've come from and what you've had to overcome. You can still see the world positively and you can still make a huge difference, and you've done that.
Yeah, you know, from what I went through, you know, as a refugee, and pretty much people saying like, you've been through hell, you know, and anything is better than hell. So pretty much, you know, I see that, you know, anything is better than what I went through, and every moment, every day that I live, you know, it's very joyful. It's like a happy day, and it was tough for me, you know, both not having my parents and living in this culture that I need some guidance for culture-wise, plus parental guidance, and you guys allow me to be a person who I am, want to be, and you always encourage me to do things. So you are very supportive of what I do, and you know, without your guidance, you know, as a parents or, you know, as a friends or, you know, and you know, I would not be here.
Here we go. Congratulations.
I think of a little boy at 9 years old arriving in a country where the language is different, the food's different, the culture, the environment.
How's it going? You want a book? Here you go. Take one. Take one. You're going to need it when you go to school.
Thanks.
And I am just in awe of how he could do that, how he could adapt to a whole new country. And he had to miss his birth parents, and they had to miss him. And to know that he was able to overcome all those things and become such a fine young man that he is today, that's not a credit to us, it's a credit to him.
Congratulations. Hello.
In October of 1979, Governor Ray and 5 other governors went on a trip to China. Organized by the Council for U.S.-China Relations and the State Department, it was part of the effort to normalize relations with China. But Southeast Asia got on the agenda.
There were 6 of us governors that had made this visit to China, and I think I was the one who made arrangements for us to go to Thailand.
I think it's important to note that we were going to Thailand thinking we were going to go to refugee camps to see people who were basically living their lives not threatened, but who were waiting to be resettled, to get a feel for how many people were coming out, what kind of people they were, etc.
At one of the camps, Iowa's and Governor Ray's reputation preceded him and First Lady Billy Ray.
Well, we walked in this little place that, as I recall, looked almost like a log cabin, and inside, there on the wall, was this Department of Transportation map from the state of Iowa. It had little pins where people had been resettled in the state of Iowa.
Then another stop was added. The group learned that Cambodians were spilling over the border into Thailand, escaping the killing fields of the murderous Pol Pot regime. That camp was less than 2 weeks old.
And we drove for several hours out to the Thai-Cambodian border and down these, dirt roads to essentially what was kind of a big open farm field in which there were 30,000 human beings sort of deposited around it in the most awful circumstances you could imagine.
It's hard to ever forget thousands of people lying in a mud field, skin and bones, no life, no activity, not enough food, or almost not enough food to keep alive. It was just a matter that one would never forget. I remember the person that was going to hand off this little girl to hold, and she probably was 4 or 5 years old, and her head just dropped, and she was dead. 50 to 100 people died in that mud camp a day, and it was so awful.
The thought was that there's 30,000 here. There's another 6,970,000 more inside Cambodia who are probably in the same or worse circumstances.
We came back and decided that we might be able to help save lives again, not in relocating all of those people, but at least keeping them alive until they could be relocated.
During their stay at the camp,
When the Iowans arrived back in Des Moines on the evening of October 29th, they were met by local press.
It's deplorable, it's unbelievable, and these are human beings just like you and me, and yet they're losing their lives.
As I remember, it was a pretty big story for our governor to be doing this, and I wanted to get a jump on what he had to say when he came home.
He asked about pictures, and so I gave him the rolls of pictures that we had taken, not knowing what they looked like. And that's what really started the movement toward raising that money to help those people.
The coverage of the camps prompted responses from all sectors of Iowa's civic life, government, business, churches, and the Des Moines Register threw its weight behind a fundraising effort.
The Register became deeply involved because the Register in those days had the biggest loudspeaker in the state. It was a statewide newspaper, so the Register was a kind of a coalescing force within the state.
We sent food and medicine to the Thai border, Cambodia, that arrived on Christmas Day of 1979. Probably could not be more perfect timing. We also sent through UNICEF into the interior of Cambodia to orphanages and Prey Vang all the way on the other side of the country. And I think in the end, we took in probably close to $600,000, and we sent food on multiple occasions and medical people. and probably it lasted a couple of years.
You know, I'm a cynical newspaper man. Everybody has a little do-gooder element to them. So I kind of dismissed it as a little bit of that. Business, the paper, churches. It didn't strike me as being that significant. I thought it'd be kind of a one-trick pony. It amounted to a great deal and touched a lot of lives.
There are as many stories about the Indo-Chinese exodus as there are refugees and all the people who helped them, officially and unofficially. And in truth, not every story had a happy ending, but enough did, and many lives were saved.
I think what it shows is that everyone can do something and make a difference in this world. We might not be able to do it all, but we can do something. And isn't there great satisfaction in that? The happiest people I know are people who are doing things for other people. Think about it at Christmas time. What makes you happiest? Is it what someone gives you or what you give to make somebody pleased, right?
What was captured by this, and you see it in other disasters in this state, is the coming together of the Iowa community. Here's a crisis. Our governor, who we respect, says we have to help. Our humanitarian instincts say, yes, we should, and we're feeling a little bad because of what happened in Southeast Asia that America helped to cause. So we kind of reach out. We can reach out together as a community, as a church community, in some cases just as individuals.
It was a risk, and in some places it was just too stressful. In other places it was difficult maybe economically or socially. But by and large, it was a wonderful thing. And even where it didn't work, it worked because people learned.
Sometimes after getting on their feet, the refugees left Iowa. Sometimes they put down roots and stayed. Some became doctors. Some worked in factories. But the bottom line was they had the opportunity to live and live as they chose.
Hello, congratulations. Thank you very much.
And they changed Iowa, too.
The number one thing that it did for Iowans was that it aided and abetted the healing process after the Vietnam War. The scars and the wounds were so deep and so intense. And to be able to have something to do as a state, to have something to do together, where if you were pro-war, anti-war, military, pacifist, everybody could feel very good about doing this. And it was about Indochina.
Look, Vietnam it tore this country apart. We're still divided over it. We will be throughout the lifetimes of all of us who lived through that era. But individuals look at the problems of the world and they say, what could I do? Well, this effort was enabled one individual, one family, one church to reach out and actually take one or two little human beings and surround them with love and to help them get a start in the new world. That's the story of America.
In 1980, the United States rewrote its refugee law. Rather than the ad hoc approach that existed in 1975, there is now a permanent standardized mechanism for bringing in refugees from around the world. To this day, Iowa has continued to resettle refugees. The Iowa Bureau of Refugee Services is the only entity run by a state government that is certified as a resettlement agency by the U.S. State Department.
99% of the people in Iowa don't even know this. And it's one of the things we ought to just be immensely proud of. We ought to be publicizing constantly and saying, isn't this great? Look at us. Look at our role in the world. You know, no state has ever done anything like we do. No state is an official resettlement agency.
And it all started with Bob Ray.
I think, by and large, he was a reflection and is a reflection of how Iowans look at things
Wayne Johnson was head of the state's resettlement agency from 1989 until January 2007.
Had he not done this, had the program not been put into place, had it not been successful through the efforts of many different agencies and many different people, many different institutions, would the state be as able to accept Bosnians beginning in 1993, Sudanese beginning in 1992? I don't know. It's a philosophical question, but I think that the legacy continues.
In 1975, many Americans wanted to forget the war, wanted to forget Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. We couldn't, of course. The legacy of Indochina will always be with us, part of who we are. Certainly because of the Americans who sacrificed. More than 58,000 of them, 869 Iowans, died over there. But it is also part of who we are because many Southeast Asians were able to survive and live over here.
They've added a lot to our country. But the great thing to me is that you can come here and you can be a refugee, but then you become an Iowan just like everybody else.
It made Iowa a much better state, a broader state, a more interesting state, a more diverse state.
Iowans are better for it. The people whose lives were saved are better because of what we did, and we did it together. And if I have to list, I would have to list this as something that I'm very, very proud of.
And all that grew out of a war America didn't win.
It humiliated us as a nation to get into something like this, try so hard and then lose. Nothing like that had ever happened in America before. And, you know, when a nation's feeling bad about itself, that's a bad time because we may do something silly. And in this case, what we did was to take a step up, not down, and help people. And I think it was good for all of us.
Funding for A Promise Called Iowa was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation. Generations of families and friends who feel passionate about Iowa Public Television programs.